Grace and peace, everybody. Welcome to Berean TV. I was going over some slides with the class earlier, and there's a few things I want to bring out. I really want to share some books so believers can know what they're dealing with when we start dealing with the conscious community, and give y'all a quick rundown on Cometicism or Kemetic doctrine. When we talk about Kemetic spirituality, it's really just a rebirth or resurgent of the ancient Egyptian spirituality. When we use the word Kemetic or KMT, that's what the Egyptians called themselves before Greek invasions, and then they started using the actual word Egypt. So Egypt and Kemet is the same place. It just depends on the time, after Alexander the Great or before Alexander the Great. You know somebody that's involved in Kemetic doctrine because for the most part they'll use the word Kemet as opposed to Egypt. But if they're teaching, if they're talking to somebody and they don't know, to make it easier for people, they'll just say the word, they'll just say the word Kemet. They'll just say the word Egypt, I'm sorry. Let me see if I can make this thing bigger. Hopefully y'all can hear me. I have this heat thing going on behind me. So when we start dealing with it, it's basically the ancient Egyptian spirituality, not from Alexander the Great, like I said, but from prior dynasties. One of the problems that we have, a lot of people don't know that even before Alexander the Great came, Persians were ruling Kemet for 100 years, maybe a little over 100 years. But I'm going to talk a little bit about what they believe, and we'll get into the books. What do they believe? They believe that you can have life after death. They're correct. If you're talking to someone from Kemet, in writing, they had it written down before the Bible was written that people can live after they die, that people will be judged in this life for things that they have done in the afterlife, or to see if you're going to receive everlasting lives. They believe God's created the worlds, what they call netas, and they do have control. They believe in magic, or what believers would call spirit miracles. Some manuals you'll hear them often talking about, like we have manuals, we have the Bible, we have Psalms, dedicate, we have different things. They have the coffin text, the pyramid text, and the book of the dead, or the book of the coming forth by day. I want to talk a little bit about that. The coffin texts were texts that were simply found in a coffin. Pyramid texts were texts that were found in the pyramid. And why they call this other one the Book of the Dead, which are just magical spells that was found among the dead bodies, among the mummies, when they were raiding the tombs and stuff in ancient Kemet. So the Book of the Coming Forth by Day is the term that they prefer people to use. And they say the white man started using the Book of the Dead, and that's not the proper name. You got to respect the book. Christians have to understand that Kemetic influence runs deep in the world. Outside of the doctrines or the teachings, or what people would call the influence or the waking of Hebrew Israelites on the church, and people coming out of the church to deal with Hebrew Israelite doctrines, however you want to explain it, outside of that, the Kemetic doctrine is the second strongest doctrine to pull people out of the church. People turn from the church to Kemetic spirituality, and one of the main reasons is they say it existed before Christianity and it belongs to Africa. It only makes sense. So we're not only fighting the whitewashing of Christianity, slavery in the Western world, and so many things, racism and so many other things. People are walking away and they feel it's just practical. That's one of the main reasons why we have to fight against this European image of Christ and all of this other stuff that the Western world has established. A lot of this stuff is based around a conspiracy. What's the conspiracy? The conspiracy of white folk are wicked. White folk came into Kemet and stole everything. We're going to get into James's book, because this is a major book in the conscious community. And white people stole everything. You can't trust white people, and they lied. They took the spirituality and they flipped it. So what we call magic, or what we call the esoteric doctrine, or what some people would call Freemasonry or whatever, the white man took it and he's running the country off of it, and he gave us a watered down version of what we would call Christianity. We have influences of Kemet all across the United States of America, in the Vatican, various churches in Europe. And this is what people would say, this is etched out to you in plain old symbols and iconography. When we start dealing with Washington, D.C., we're going to get a little bit into Tony Browder's book, speaking about Egypt on the Potomac. We can say for sure that a lot of the founding fathers, like a lot of Europeans, Napoleon, and a lot of people in Europe and France all over were obsessed with Kemet, ancient Kemet, and they went there, and there was a time for decades that they were just in their tomb raiding and robbing. This is where we get the majority of artifacts that they would have in the British Museum here in New York, or the Louvre in France. This is just where they got a lot of their stuff from going in there and basically robbing the country, taking things out, not only the resources, but spiritual ideas. A lot of people, black and white, believe that this is where the occult originated. This is where Freemasonry originated and other things, but we're going to go on. They left symbols. They weren't originally on a dollar bill, but they came on later on because they wanted to honor ancient Kemet. So people involved in the spirituality, in the history, they would ask, why would these Europeans leave symbols on the dollar bill, leave symbols in cemeteries and buildings in Washington, D.C., in our courthouse? When we see the scales of justice, that's what they would call mayat, having balance. Are you going to be fair in what you're doing in judging? So a lot of what the European founding fathers did was established off of ancient Kemet. We have a lot of people that's running around here and they're ex-pastors, and it's basically because they've been influenced by Kemet. Why it seems like the pyramids are older than the Genesis story in the Bible. What about the negative confessions? We did a lot of building and they wanted to wipe us out of history. And some of these questions are legit questions. This is Seti. For y'all that don't know, he's a general, Sarasutan. A lot of people are going to Kemet and they're being initiated into their own mystery. Forget Prince Hall. They want to go to Kemet and they want to set up their own fraternal orders. And a lot of people have done that. They went with Ashwa Kwesi, Dr. Ben, various people went out there and they just resurrected the ancient Osirian mysteries, or what they would call the universities. There was only one university at a time, and then later on it spread out. But there was one university in Kemet, and many people argued that the Greeks went there for their higher knowledge. Not all of the Greeks, but there are some Greeks, there are some travelers that went there. Diodorus, Herodotus, and different writers that went there. Some people argue Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, every Pythagoras, every single person was initiated into these mysteries. So we'll have people like Seti and them, they're involved in resurrecting the ancient order. They all teach that the black woman is God. This is young Pharaoh. He teach one of those doctrines. And in ancient Kemet, they believed in balance. They believed in nature. It was like a natural thing. They would study nature and they would build their spirituality off of that. So they would often knock the concept of God being a man or God not having a wife like the God of the Bible. And so there are people out here that's propagating that the black woman is God. Black man is the original man, and the black woman birthed everybody in the world, and they believe in goddesses. So it's God. If it's a god, Dr. Ben would often say it has to be a goddess, and that brings about balance, like yin and yang. That brings about balance. The three main people that teach that the black woman is God is Seti and young Pharaoh and Polite. They all have a large following. We're going to get into some other stuff. They teach various doctrines, but they're all part of what we would call leaders in Kemetic doctrine and Kemetic teachings. When we start dealing with the Kemetic teachings, a lot of ex-pastors, you'll hear a lot of people making statements online, and they come from Walter Williams' book, The Historical Origins of Christianity. He say nobody in the Bible ever existed. And when Alexander the Great came in, you'll hear Kevin Wesley saying the same story word for word. He wanted to be a pharaoh. Ray Hagan saying it, ex-pastor Tamel. They're all quoting Walter Williams. So the book you have to get, study, and research is Walter Williams' book. And he said from the time of Alexander's invasion in 332 all the way to 325, when Constantine came on the scene, Europeans were stealing and rewriting history and working Christianity and making it the ancient Kemetic religion. That's why people would tell you, John G. Jackson and everybody, Christianity is nothing but plagiarized, watered down Egyptian spirituality. Afrocentric Ideology and Church History is a good book that refutes it. There's not a lot of material because scholars have looked a lot of what we would call the Afrocentric movement as nonsense. We had Mary Lefkowitz and a few people, but too many people didn't write speaking against this. People would often ask, how can, because Dr. Ben Thornton Cornell, Leonard Jeffries was there on downtown J Street, I believe it is, John Jay, how can so many of them teach in universities if so much of this is pseudo? I'm gonna do some separate teaching on that, how they actually got into the university. Scared white folk. A lot was going on in the 60s, and folk wasn't playing no games. They out there protesting. They just said, just get a black folk, give them what they want, give them a class, give them an Afrocentric course. And it came in there. People grabbed some material together, and we're going to get into the main person. One of the main persons to bring this thing forth is George M. James. This is a Guyanese gentleman. In 1954, he wrote this book, Stolen Legacy. He's the one that said everything that comes from the Greeks actually come from ancient Kemet. And this is the problem. Everything from Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Greek philosophy, math, science, medicine, everything was taught in Kemet in the universities, and the Greeks took it, and it wasn't no problem. They honored their black or their Kemetic priest, African Kemetic priest, Egyptian priest. They honored them, but later on, Europeans like the Romans and when the slave trade started, others attempted to hide all of this stuff and act like it actually began all with Europeans. Now, why this thing is problematic is because we do know that Europeans attempted to wipe us out of history. This is why in school and high school and junior high school, they start us off with slavery. They give us a little Malcolm X, and that's it. So people that's involved in Kemetic spirituality, they want to raise the consciousness of black people, and they want to give you history. They say any type of spirituality that's not resurrecting the people is not spirituality, but it's religion, and it's to bind or hold you back. So the book of Stolen Legacy, this book here is definitely something worth having so you can understand the entire movement and what the argument is. This is very important. Other books that you'll see that I spoke about a little bit earlier is the Egyptian Book of the Dead. This, like I said, this is what they claim Europeans called it, but the people in Kemet called it the Book of the Coming Forth by Day. And this is actually magical spells that they would have for when you die. You can have these spells when you're going through the underworld, and you can speak to the beings. They didn't use the word demons. They didn't use terminology like that. We have to be careful, because when they started raping and robbing and pillaging these books, that's how they got the Book of the Dead. The Papyri of Annie, that's one Book of the Dead. There's many of them, and there's many translations, but this Papyri of Annie is one, and Sir Wallace Budge, who was one of the first translators, he went to Egypt from Europe. He went to Egypt and he started stealing things and bringing them back out to fill up the British Museum. And this was one of those that they brought out. And I believe they had to cut it up in copies. It's about 72 pages or something like that. They had to cut it up to get it out, and they put it back together when they got to Europe with it. It's in the British Museum right now. And Annie, he wasn't a pharaoh, but he wrote for the pharaoh. He was an aristocrat. He was one of what you would call scribes. He knew how to write. He was a priest. The priests were the educated people. So he wanted his own copy, and he made his copy. And this is one of the best copies of the Book of the Dead. He had the prayers, or what they would call the magical spells, in there, but he also had elaborate drawings. He had free time, being that he was a priest and he was from the upper caste of the Egyptian elite. He had time to write it, and this Papyri of Annie is one of the best copies that's out, and it's in the British Museum. Osiris and the Egyptian Resurrection. There's a video on religion and spirituality by Ray Hagan, and he said that he heard somebody talking about that book, and brothers saying that Jesus' story wasn't unique, but he didn't pay them any mind. But 3 years later, he walked into a bookstore and he found this book, Osiris and the Egyptian Resurrection. When people start telling you the Book of the Dead and in Kemet is the whole Bible plagiarized, you have to ask them, show me where it is. Now, you can get a lot of this on PDF, but the problem is it's not like I can say, go to John 3:16, and it's laid out like that. It depends if it's Wallace Budge. It depends what Book of the Dead you have. It's harder to find that same exact spell in the same place. So it could be some confusion in the midst of you doing the research. So you have to ask them, because they'll tell you, they'll make it sound like there was a flood story inside the resurrection of Osiris, that he fed 5,000, that he was baptized, and all of that stuff came about later on from people like Kersey Graves and World 16 Crucified Saviors. So we have these things which are primary sources. They were using the Book of the Dead from 15, 17, 1900, all the way down to, I think, about 400, or on 400, it was 400 AD. It was actually still used by many people. And I have to put this in there, that a lot of temples and a lot of people that practice the ancient belief system, when Christianity, after the Edict of Milan, when Christianity got on top, a lot of Christians started terrorizing and burning up temples and burning up books. And these are facts right here. So when the conscious community says certain things, they know what they're talking about, and we have to acknowledge that that's what the church done. Some people say, well, it's the Roman Catholic Church. The Catholic Church really didn't come about till later on. It was after Constantine had the Edict of Milan, and Christians weren't no longer tortured and terrorized and fed to the lions, when they started growing in numbers and it was popular to be a Christian. They started doing some things that were not so righteous. Dr. Ben, I'm going to start with him. He's the master. These are some of his books: We the Black Jews, African Origins of Major Western Religion. Remember, everybody is saying that all spirituality came from Kemet. The Black Man's Bible, Black Man of the Nile. He spoke specifically on Genesis and Exodus, try to explain how the story came together. And Africa, Mother of Western Civilization. These are some interesting books. I have everything here. But if you're going to get into real research, it's okay to have. I think you might be able to find some of this stuff on PDF. Dr. Ben taught for many years in Cornell University upstate. If you go online, if you look at his obituary, I believe Sinette and them had his funeral there. He didn't have a PhD. He had an honorary degree. On the back of his obituary says that. And if you go online and just Google it and research, get into that. A lot of people get upset when you bring that out. They say, oh, leave him alone. He was a master teacher anyway. You have to remember that these people were trying to raise up a culture, raise up a people, because of so many European lies. But we have to find balance. People would often say, well, can I tell a lie just to raise a people up? Or are we just as bad as Europeans that lied and attempt to whitewash everything and write us out of history? You be the judge. Another book they often talk about, books that they often talk about, is someone named Gerald Massey. He was a European Druid. He was back and forth in correspondence with people like Helen Blavatsky back in the days. And he was an amateur Egyptologist, but he was a mystic. He was not a Freemason, but he was a mystic. And people like Dr. Charles Finch that taught in Morehouse College, he used to write for Ivan Van Sertima's bi-monthly journal out of Rutgers on ancient Kemet. And he said that Massey and his wife, basically, she was a channeler, and they would call spirits up from the home. So he wasn't a Mason, but he was involved in mystical doctrines. He wrote the book, The Historical Jesus and the Mystical Christ. He said, forget about the historical Jesus. And in this book, he attempted to argue that Paul didn't think about a historical Jesus, but Paul was basically pushing a Gnostic doctrine, the mystical Christ doctrine that we're hearing so many people talking about, opening up your third eye, Christ in you. and Oprah Winfrey and so many other people. The Jesus legend traced in Egypt for 10,000 years. He's trying to touch on the same thing, that there was a Christ, and kind of like what Kersey Graves was doing, there were other saviors and all of the biblical doctrines. You have to look, you have to find out where they're getting this from. If you're going to look at a primary source and somebody bring that out, y'all have to look and tell them, I want to find it. I want to write it down. I'm not sure what you're saying, but I'd like to look into it. Because when Massey and all of these people and Budge and everybody, when they were terrorizing Egypt, Budge specifically, and so many Europeans were stealing things, and they just, Champollion, and they just started to break the code and begin to interpret the hieroglyphs, they were doing that with a Western mindset. So automatically they would see certain things and they would say resurrection, born again, being baptized, because they knew of Christianity. So they automatically equated things. That's how come we can't deal with old scholarship from 150 years ago. If you speak to modern Egyptologists and you ask them about that, they're going to say, well, it wasn't really that. When we start getting into the virgin birth and you deal with Plutarch or different people that wrote on it, even if you go further back, you can see in the Osiris story that he was cut up into pieces. And his wife Osiris said, his wife Isis went to find the pieces and she couldn't find the phallus. And she fashioned one and got on top of him. And that's how the seed went into her. That's magical sex. That's nothing like virgin birth that you would see in the gospel stories. Ancient Egypt, Light of the World, that has got to be the most popular book in the conscious community. Once again, Gerald Massey, who's a European, says that all of these things come from Black Africa. He's attempting to trace everything in the Bible, every word dealing with the Israelites and the Hebrew. He's trying to connect everything with ancient Kemet to show that it's all one story. A student of him was a Freemason who 30 degrees in the lodge. Remember, Freemasonry was jumping in Europe, and his name was Albert Churchward. He's very interesting and he's heavy. And like I said, he wrote from a Masonic perspective. And you know, among his famous books are this one here, Signs and Symbols of Primordial Man, and the origin and evolution of religion. He gets into the whole thing from Kemet and attempt to tie it into different religions coming all the way down and spreading throughout Europe. The origin and evolution of Freemasonry and the origin and the antiquity of Freemasonry. They attempted to trace back what they were doing with Scottish Rite, York Rite, Freemasonry that came about later on, Knights Templar and all of that stuff that they were doing in Europe, to tie it all back to the priest of Kemet. And a lot of people argue that different Greeks that went there were initiated into the mysteries. And that's why George Washington and different founding fathers who were Freemasons gave reverence. That's why inside the lodge, you'll see a lot of iconography dealing with ancient Kemet and different things. So that's those two people. Who we have here, John G. Jackson. I think he came from South Carolina, and he came up and he started to work with Arthur Schomburg up here in New York City and write for him. And he wrote Christianity Before Christ, going with Massey and going with Kersey Graves and other people. He said that there was a Christianity. But once again, we have to go to the same thing they were supposed to do. Instead of dealing with the secondary sources, go to the primary. What does that Osiris resurrection story, is it the same as a gospel story? What does the Book of the Dead, inside the Book of the Dead, you have the negative confessions. Some people believe that these were said when you were moving up and you were coming into the lodge, which was the university, which was the school, and you would say that I haven't offended, I have not done this, and I have not done that, so you can move up to the different degrees. Like Blue Lodge, they have 3 degrees in Freemasonry today. Dr. Ben argues that they also had 3 degrees, but you would be 20 years in 1 degree. And there was never a Greek that went all the way up. Some people argue the Greeks got upset after a while, and Alexander, they just came in there and stole all the books. And they took the mysteries. That's how come you'll find certain people saying the white man only have 33 and the 3rd degrees of the knowledge that came from ancient Kemet. The Pope and them, they're holding 33 degrees, and George Washington and all of the Europeans, but Dr. Ben and other people that went and resurrected the ancient doctrine, they hold 360 degrees of knowledge. God, Man, and Civilization. These are all John Jackson books. And remember that his job was to build up a people. His job was to build up a people. Everything you're doing, you want to check and double check what they're saying. People in the conscious community grab everything, love them, and repeat them because they were the master teachers. But the master teachers were wrong in some things. Echoes of a Dark Land. This comes from Charles Finch. He taught in Morehouse. And Charles Finch is important because there's a video with him on YouTube. He was basically the connect with the great Shay Canty Diop and bringing him over here and plugging him in with Ivan Van Sertima. And that's how they started kind of formulating things and getting it together. But he taught medicine in Morehouse. He spoke to Van Sertima. Ivan Van Sertima that was in Rutgers, and Ivan Van Sertima asked him to write an article, and that's how they got close, and they started working, and it was an ongoing relationship. These are how these people kind of met and mingled. But he speaks often of Kemet. I believe he's still around right now. You can find some of his videos on YouTube, but this is his book, and he's the connection between Shay Canty Diop and Ivan Van Sertima. This is from the Browder Files. This is Anthony T. Browder. Someone said that the last couple of years he did receive he have a higher degree. I think he have a PhD in some, but whatever. And he wrote this book from the Browder's File. These are popular books here, especially for people just coming into Kemetic knowledge, from the Browder File and Nile Valley Civilization. A lot of short chapters with a lot of information. In Egypt on the Potomac, he connects so many things in Washington, D.C. Like I said, from the founding fathers, he connects them to Washington, D.C. He connects them to ancient Egypt. This is from Shay Canty Diop right here. These are his most popular books. He was definitely a scholar. I think they said that he translated in the Sanghalese and his African language. He translated Albert Einstein's theory of relativity into his African language. But he wrote these books, and these are popular in the conscious community. He argued that in Lower Egypt, Upper Egypt, in the Sudan, Lower Sudan, Sub-Saharan Africa, it's the same black people. Because a lot of European scholars were arguing when you get to North Africa, those weren't actually black people, especially in later dynasties that were ruling. They'll attempt to tell you that those were, some has went as far to say that those were dark-skinned Caucasians that were the pharaohs throughout all of the dynasties. And a lot of people have problems with that, but again, that's them attempting to whitewash. I threw some other stuff in here that's popular. Chancellor Williams' book, Destruction of a Black Civilization. He just traces a lot of history here. He gets into good detail about how the Muslim slave trade. A lot of people talking about the white man and the white Christians having slaves over here and taking us to the West Indies and, North and South America and Europe or whatever. But he gets into detail that slavery existed way before European Christians. One of the top 100 amazing facts about the Negro, J.A. Rogers, he traveled and he documented a lot of what he's seen. Under there is Varnley, Ruins of an Empire. He was another Frenchman, I believe it was. There's a famous saying that he have that a lot of people in the conscious community likes. He was telling the Europeans of his time that the same people that we are holding in slavery and then we look down upon as nothing, they were leaders and builders of the world from the earliest of times. You can find that online, but that's kind of what makes his Ruins of Empires real popular. And we have Wayne's book down there, Ancient Future. That's another one. These are just a few. I'm gonna see how many slides I have left here. I just want to kind of give y'all a rundown of what's popular in the conscious community and how these things are used. Remember, they're moving on these white people from George M. James' book, Stolen Legacy. That's why I started out with that. They're moving on. These Europeans have lied about everything. Everything is a lie. Christianity is a lie. The Bible is a lie. When we're dealing with Kemet, you have to get everything and chop it up piece by piece. You can't just let them bunch everything together. All of the Bible stories are not in Kemet. Did Kemet have Psalms? The whole world had Psalms. Did they have laws? Of the whole world had laws. Sumer, did they have a creation story? The whole everybody, the greatest civilizations, them, Mesopotamia, so everybody had creation stories. So we have to just be careful and make sure you're going back to the source. Don't just trust what they say. Oh, the master teacher say, y'all don't know. Our master teacher said, all right, who? Who? Show us who. Calm yourself down. And remember, a lot of people don't know what they're talking about. They're just trusting and quoting Walter Williams, a lot of the ex-pastors. Same thing we see later on with John G. Jackson and so many others. They're just quoting Kersey Gray's World 16 Crucified Saviors. But if their foundation is shaky, if they started off pseudo, everybody that quotes them is pseudo and also wrong. You got to go back to primary sources. I spoke about Van Sertima. I can't leave him out. African presence in early America. They came before Columbus. Blacks in science and early America revisited. Was there a black present here with the Indians, especially in light of so many Moors, Dan Calloway, and so many people saying the slave trade didn't even go down the way we thought it went down. That plenty blacks were already here. And you know, a lot of Europeans, even when you start getting into those cocaine mummies, you know, there were some mummies that German scholars found from Kemet, from ancient Egypt, and they had cocaine, the traces of cocaine in there. But cocaine is not indigenous to Africa. Cocaine is indigenous to South America. So they couldn't even imagine, fathom in their mind that they had boats that could have made it all the way here to trade people to get, you know, cocaine and other things that's original to the Americas over here. You know, they feel that European contact was the first contact. And so, you know, so we're answering a lot of questions. We have to deal with race and racism and lies from Europeans. And, you know, and this is what we're up against. If you like what you heard, subscribe. My name is Brother Berean. What I got here? Oh, African Origin. This brother Ashby, he have a couple of books. He's down in Florida. He's been writing for years on Egyptian yoga, pineal gland, tracing the different religions. I have a lot of books to go through, so maybe I'll do a part to this. But if you like what you heard, subscribe. Thanks. Thank you for watching. Let me see if I can get this thing.